Hello everybody, welcome to video 46. Today we're going to dive a little bit more into the heart, and we're going to take a look at the path of blood through the heart. Now, when we talk about the path of blood through the heart, obviously the heart is not just recycling blood straight through it. Obviously it's got to get to the rest of your tissues, to your lungs, to your muscles, to your brain, and some things like that. So we're going to mention some of the major arteries that exit or enter, arteries and veins that enter and exit the heart, but all of our focus today is going to be on the blood flow within the heart. So the easiest way to do this is with a heart box diagram. We're going to spend some time in class going over this heart box diagram here. So if you put it in your notes now, that's great, but we'll also spend some time with it in class, so you don't have to necessarily do that right now. But on one side, we're going to have the lungs. The other side, we're going to have the body. And you can see the arrows pointing in what direction blood is flowing in each of these chambers here. So we're going to start in the right atrium, right here, this right atrium, okay? You can see that this arrow is pointing down, and it's actually, this box here is going to be a valve, and that is the tricuspid valve that it is going to pass through here. So the tricuspid valve, tri meaning because it has three cusps or three sections that it's going to use to prevent backflow of blood from the right ventricle. So blood will flow from the right atrium through the tricuspid valve and into the right ventricle, which is housed right in here, in the right ventricle. From the right ventricle, it'll pass through another valve. This one will be one of the semilunar valves. It'll be the Pulmonary Sl Valve. And it is going to, you can see the arrow, it will pass all the way to the lungs. And we ignore some of the other arteries and stuff that are associated with this here outside of the one that's carrying it. So you can see, kind of hard to see with this model here, but once the blood passes through the tricuspid valve and it's sitting in our right ventricle here, that right ventricle will contract and it will send the blood up through. You can see the Pulmonary Sl Valve here, those two little white dots there, semilunar because they look like half moons or crescent moons when it passes through. And it will pass through this blood vessel right here, which is known as the pulmonary artery. So that pulmonary artery, because it's leaving the heart here, that pulmonary artery will branch and it will send it to the right and to the left lung. Once it's in the lungs, it'll pick up oxygen and it will return back to the heart through the pulmonary vein. Now, the pulmonary vein, you're going to be sitting right here. Is going to return blood from the right lung and from the left lung and empty the blood into your left atrium right here. So the left atrium, again, a receiving chamber. Both atria are receiving chambers here. So the left atrium will receive blood from the lungs. Once that atrium contracts, it'll send blood through the bicuspid valve and into the left ventricle right here. Left ventricle is very, very thick, very muscular, and very strong, especially compared to the right ventricle, because you think the right ventricle only has to send blood to your lungs. So the distance from your heart to your lungs is not very far. The left ventricle, however, has to send blood to the entire body. So it has to have enough muscle to contract with enough force, build up enough pressure to send blood not only all the way to your brain, but also to your toes. And so that's why your left ventricle is very large and a very strong muscle. When it contracts, blood will pass through the aortic semilunar valve. Very, very difficult to see on this model all the way at the back there. But once it passes through the aortic semilunar valve, it will pass through the aorta. You can see the aorta right here. It's got that classic arch that we're all familiar with, that aortic arch, as that blood is passing from the left ventricle through the aorta to the body. Now the last one, once your body has used up that oxygen and that blood is returning back to the heart, it's going to pass through one of two different veins, but it depends on where in the body you are. So if you are above the heart, it's going to pass through the superior vein that we're going to talk about here, and if that blood vessel or if that body tissue is below the heart, it's going to pass through the inferior tissue. or the inferior vein here. So the two veins here are the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava. So both those two, superior meaning coming from above, so that is our superior vena cava here, draining all the blood out of everything above the heart. And then on the underside here, you can see the inferior vena cava also is going to drain blood into this right atrium, but it's going to drain all the blood from all the body tissues below the heart. And here, I'm going to go through this a little quick, little faster here. Same heart box diagram, but now we have red and blue to denote oxygenated versus deoxygenated blood. So blood with oxygen is not actually like truly like this bright red versus this dark blue that we see here. And actually, deoxygenated blood, we say blue just to differentiate between the two, but that is actually closer to a maroon color or a dark red color as opposed to oxygenated blood, which is a little bit of a brighter red. So don't think that your blood is actually blue when it's deoxygenated. That's just kind of the standard procedure we use for denoting which sides. But you can see here on the entire right side, the right atrium all the way through the pulmonary artery and into the lungs is all containing deoxygenated blood. So this is blood that does not have oxygen. It's already given it to the body tissues, because you got to remember you're cycling through all of your blood here. So your blood goes through periods of having oxygen, giving that oxygen, having no oxygen, and having to go back and get oxygen here. So everything with the right side is going to be associated with deoxygenated blood, the right atrium and the right ventricle. One thing that I see students mess up, though, is this pulmonary artery. Usually students think that an artery automatically means that it has oxygen. And in most cases that's true, but there is one exception in this pulmonary artery here. The true definition of an artery is just that a blood vessel that is leaving the heart. So the pulmonary artery is a blood vessel that is leaving the heart. It's exiting the heart. It's carrying blood that's being discharged from that right ventricle, but it does not contain oxygen. Instead, it's on its way to the lungs so that that blood can pick up oxygen. So that one is one that I see missed quite often. And in a similar vein, you have the pulmonary vein here. Usually students think vein automatically means deoxygenated blood. And in most cases, again, that's true. This is just the one exception. Veins, their correct definition is a blood vessel that is returning to the heart. So the pulmonary vein is returning to the heart from the lungs, but it is carrying oxygenated blood because that blood has just picked up oxygen from the lungs and is on its way back to the heart so that the heart can send it through the rest of the body. So once that blood is back on the left side of the heart, it's oxygenated. It'll go through the left atrium, bicuspid valve, the left ventricle, the aortic semilunar valve, and the aorta, all the way to the body, wherever it is in the body that blood vessel is headed to. Could be anywhere, your brain, your toes, your heart even has its own blood supply. So it has a branch that comes off of the aorta and feeds the heart because the heart muscle needs oxygen itself. So whatever happens, that blood is delivering oxygen to the rest of your body tissues, and as it does that, it becomes deoxygenated, and now it needs to go back to the heart so that the heart can send it to the lungs. And so we get this cycle, the superior and inferior vena cava return it back to the heart. So everything on this side here is blue, showing that it is deoxygenated blood. Everything on this side here, red, meaning that it is oxygenated blood. One last note about circulation in fetuses is that it is quite a bit different because obviously infants in utero are not breathing. They don't need to breathe to be able to acquire oxygen. Instead, they're acquiring oxygen through diffusion with the mother's blood, with that placenta and all those nutrient exchanges. So you have two small umbilical arteries and one large umbilical vein that's carrying mother's blood to the placenta, where the exchange between the mother's nutrients and the baby's nutrients is going to take place. So oxygen as well as other nutrients get exchanged at that placental barrier in between the two. And so that's how babies are acquiring oxygen while they are in utero. And also because of that, that's where the baby is getting rid of carbon dioxide and other wastes. So they don't, not only do they not need to breathe in, they do not need to breathe out. Well, if you don't need to breathe out, you don't need to basically reoxygenate blood and send it to your lungs. That basically means that you have really no reason to use or to have the entire right side of your heart, because the entire purpose of the right side of the heart is to send blood to the lungs to pick up oxygen. But that blood is already doing that elsewhere. So instead, you have what's known as the foramen ovale. And you can't really tell on here, but the foramen ovale is a hole in the interatrial septum between that right atrium and that left atrium that allows blood to enter the right atrium and go directly into the left atrium. So it picks up oxygen elsewhere, and then the superior and inferior vena cava return that blood, oxygenated blood, to the right atrium. It'll immediately go to the left atrium, to the left ventricle, and get sent out through the rest of the body so that it can deliver blood to those body tissues. There we go. Sometimes this foramen ovale doesn't always seal up. Usually it pretty much seals up almost right at birth, give or take a little bit. But sometimes it does fail to seal, and so this would be where you hear people say that they were born with a hole in their heart, is because that foramen ovale failed to close up and to seal up, and so they're actually starting to get some mixing of blood between right and left side. Because that baby is starting to breathe, they're starting to need to use that right atrium and that right ventricle. And so you want to separate those two sides. You don't want the mixed blood taking place, because they're no longer receiving nutrients from that placenta. So that is a little bit on circulation specifically within the heart. We will get into the major arteries and veins of the body at a later time. But for the most part, if you're able to understand circulation as it relates to what's taking place in the heart, everything else tends to be significantly easier. So again, we'll go over that heart box diagram together as a class in class, but if you want to go back, review those, that would be good. And don't forget to make sure that you are keeping up with the video quizzes for this unit.